Agenda item today is PD1, Police Department, $27,200 approval to use for a speed enforcement program. Do we have somebody from police?
Yeah.
Come on up. We'll try to be gentle.
Thank you very much.
Actually, if you want, grab a seat over there, and if you can, identify yourself, and so Kathy can get our name down.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is John Sluzarz, S-L-U-S-A-R-Z. I'm the traffic sergeant for the Greenwich, Connecticut Police Department.
Great, John, welcome.
Thank you.
So you're looking for approval of a grant of $27,200. Do you want to explain what that's for and what you plan to do with it?
Yes, this grant is for the high-risk rural road speed enforcement program. It is a grant that will reimburse the cost for two speed radar enforcement devices, essentially radar guns, and overtime costs to conduct speed enforcement on 6 rural roads, backcountry Greenwich.
Okay. And is this a program that's been in effect before that we've received?
Yes, it has. This will be the second year that we've worked this program, last year, and this will be the second year.
Okay, and basically it is for overtime, so it's not like you're...
Right,
it's
yeah.
extra overtime for the...
Correct.
department. Okay. Any questions? Anybody?
Or just,
Leslie?
which are the 6 roads, and you said speed guns, do we keep those after this program is over, or do we return them?
That's right, yeah. The grant's provided by the DOT, state DOT, and it provides the cost for these speed guns, so we get to keep them. And the roads are King Street, North Street, Lake Avenue, Round Hill Road, Stanwich Road, and Riversville Road. And these roads, the reason why these roads were selected because of the traffic volume, that they're rural roads, they're all north of the, mostly north of the parkway, and the crash volume and the seriousness of the injuries as a result of crashes due to speeds.
Of course, we won't tell anybody which roads, right?
No, of course not, no.
Okay.
And we're not televised today.
Yeah, that's quite all right. I'd much rather people slow down on these roads than have to give them tickets.
Looking at the stipulation in the letter from the Department of Transportation that the enforcement process has to take place on those roads that are defined as rural roads, I assume that King Street, North Street, Round Hill, Stanwich, Riversville, they'll all meet the qualification as a rural road?
That is correct. These are the roads that were selected between us and the DOT.
Okay, thank you.
Really?
Are there any other streams available for this? Do we have guns of our own?
Sure. The radar guns, the speed radar guns that are provided will help. We get to keep them. The idea behind this is so that police departments will ultimately be able to put speed enforcement devices on all their police cars. So this is one way that the DOT is using to help do that. So last year we were able to get 2 new radar guns out of it. This year we'll be able to get 2 new radar guns out of it. So and it's the same for all the other police departments that participate in this program. So it's a win-win for them all. The whole idea is to get these devices into the hands of police departments so that they can use them to reduce speed, because that's one of the big factors that are killing people and injuring people, causing property damage.
You'll let us know when you're out there, right?
Oh, we are out there. I guarantee you that.
Well, may I ask a question?
Sure.
The memo that the memo you provided here does say effective July 4th, 2015 through August 31st, 2015.
Correct.
So is this sort of historic, or are you, because I know you commented about you have missed our deadlines.
Yes, this particular grant, the funds for this grant were released a little bit late, and then through the bureaucracy of getting it through all the departments to get to my desk, the filing for this particular paperwork missed your summer deadline, and I apologize for that. But yeah, it's something that happens every year. They started it last year. This year, the funding was provided a little bit late, but yeah, it's something that we keep doing.
Okay. Any other questions? John, thank you very much.
Thank you. You all have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is HD2, Health Department, $45,377, approval to use a PHEP grant.
Good
Caroline,
evening.
welcome.
How are you?
Thank
Good.
you.
This grant is a grant that I've come to you before, although it is $10,000 less than it has been in the past. This is the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Coordinator's salary and benefits for preparing plans and conducting training programs for public health preparedness. This is a 2-year grant. It totals, the yearly sum is $45,377. Of course, they won't give us the 2 years up front. They'll only give us one on a clip. So we're only, I think the check is even here for $45,377. So the total would be $90,000, where are we? 90-something thousand. I don't know. 44, 90, $90,754.
Where's 45,377?
Okay. Just on the second page of the first page of your justification, talks about year one, 7/1/15 to 6/30/15. Should that be 6/30/16?
Right. The contract is 2 years, but the one that we're asking for, because they only send one year at a time.
Yeah.
So they
No,
sent
but
the
you
check
had a
before.
typo in that first page.
Oh, where's that?
Yeah. Just talked about 7/1/15 to 6/30/15.
Oh, I see. I think she put that because that's what the grant papers indicate.
whatever,
It's
it's-
2-year.
It's the first year of the 2-year.
Yeah, it says first year of the 2-year grant, which is,
And is there any obligation for us to pay for those people, those temporary salaries after the 2-year program?
for the 2-year program?
When you're saying,
No, well, I'll come back next year before
Yeah,
the,
yeah. Well, we haven't
program
talked-
starts to receive the other 45,000.
but these are temporary people or people working temporary hours.
Right, once the money runs out, then that's
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
Then they have to wait for the next check, like we do every year. But we're $10,000 less this year than we were last year or the last 5 years before that. Well, because of the funding, federal funding is declining.
Okay,
So I have to look at my options.
great. Questions?
On the third page of the submission, there's a reference there that we're contracting to provide the services, which are shown on page 1B, and we don't actually happen to have page 1B, we have page 1A. Can I assume that if I had 1B, those services would be for us to provide a part-time emergency preparedness coordinator?
With this money, yes.
Okay, there's nothing else that we're contracting to provide other than the hiring
To
of this
meet the,
person?
to meet the deliverables outlined in the
Yes,
contract, and the
yes.
contract's about that big,
Yeah,
we never give you that. But yes, we are obligated.
yeah, but we don't have page 1B, which is where they listed the services that we're supposed to supply in
Right.
return for this money.
Right, it's extensive. I wanted to show you the first page of the contract.
Okay.
But certainly, there's obligations, and the obligations is to meet the contractual agreement, which is outlined in the contract, which is all, the preparation of plans, the updates, the training, and so on and so forth.
So this is the person that's also coordinating the volunteers, making sure they're all certified as well for any
Yes,
public.
same person, yes.
Okay. No, I think Berlin does a great job. Yep.
Thank you.
We're grateful for that.
Okay, is that it?
Yep.
Caroline, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is PR1, Parks and Rec, $48,000 additional appropriation to replace the Island Beach generator. Mr. Greco, Mr. Siciliano, welcome.
Mr. Friday's here. He can, he's our technical
Friday.
advisor, so we're here to request this funding for the replacement of a generator at Island Beach. Just to give you a little background, it's a 35 kW unit. The current unit that we have is over 20 years old. We've had it rebuilt several times, and we had a fault with it over the summer. This is the primary power for Island Beach during the summer months. We have this generator at 35 kW and a 10 kW unit that supplies power in the off-season to the caretaker's cottage and reduced facility operations but would not withstand the operation of the summer months. So this is the primary power source. After evaluating this and looking at it with our vendor and person that maintains this, it's a 20-year-old generator that should be replaced. And the issue is timing, in the sense that we would have to have this generator in place, hooked up, ready to operate by June 1st, 2016, which would mean the operation of the island, or we would have to continue to rent a unit until we could purchase this unit, in maybe July, August, or September of the 2016. So we're here to ask that question now, because if we're not successful in getting this appropriation, then we would then have to rent in June, most likely in July, because it'd have to go out to bid, and we wouldn't, probably procure the unit until August or September of next season, which would cost us about $6,000 a month in rental. So at the end of 6 weeks that we're into now, 3 more months in the, June, July, and August of next year, we would, our outlay would be $24,000 against a $34,000 generator. It just seems to be crazy to renting it. There were a couple other bills in renting the generator that we currently use for the balance of the season, and some other mechanical issues, but all of that is combined in the $48,000 requested.
So, sorry.
Joe, had this been on the radar screen the last couple of years for capital project?
Yeah,
or-
we've been watching it, and we also because it's seasonal generator, but it is the primary power. There were things that we could do to prolong it, and we have. We've done some engine rebuilding. We've done all the routine maintenance. We've kept it in relatively good shape. We probably have. I was doing some rough math yesterday. I think we have about 50,000 running hours on that, which really would amount to 5.5 years of running time, part-time, but because this island is seasonal, but it would be continuously running for 5.5 years if we did not use it as a seasonal piece of equipment. So we have about 50,000 total hours on there, which we've got our money's worth of, and we've been watching it and doing the best to keep it in full condition. If it didn't fault this season, we most likely would put it in our budget for next year, but now we're not going to make the timing, knowing that we don't have this piece of equipment to run for the beginning of the season. So it makes sense to come back and look at it, doing it now and not renting.
All right, and just, again, as an additional appropriation, we have to go through the RTM.
Correct. We'll take it, if you approve it, we'll take it through the RTM
Yep.
requirement.
But the logic being, it makes no sense to be paying for the rental of a unit on something which you're going to buy
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah,
You might as well
yeah.
buy it.
Right.
I wanted to ask on the components. So I gathered from the remarks you were just offering, of the 48,000, about 34,000 is the true purchase price of the new unit.
Correct, that's an estimate that they gave us for the purchase, yes.
And the piece of it, which is the rental, is 6,000 or 8,000?
Hold on a second, I can tell you.
7,621.
Thank you, Jeff.
70.
7620.
7621.
For 6
Thank-
weeks.
For 6
And there was
weeks.
some electrical switching gear that we had to put in for
A couple thousand.
$19,760. Oh, $1,900, $1,976.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasant?
Yeah, I'm not as enthusiastic about this. I do think if this is in the budget as such, then, as you can send it out to bid and get the contract ready to sign, prior to July 1st. So it isn't necessarily quite as late as you're talking about. But the issue is, when these capital projects come to us like this as an interim, we can't finance. It comes out of the
Excuse me, I didn't hear you.
We can't finance.
You can't?
No, they come out of the town's cash.
Okay.
So, while I do understand that, say if we didn't approve it, but I'm not saying that that's going to happen, that would mean an extra maybe month of rental costs, which now, because there's no detail to this, is probably $6,000. But it becomes financeable over basically an 8-year period of time. So there, this is some of the kind of things that we need to think about, all working together, whether, once you consider that, whether it makes sense to do it now or just pay that additional rental, and again, as you know, you can send it out to bid prior to.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we're here early to ask that question. The other reason is that, you know, it isn't going to go the way you said it was going to go. It's 1 month, because these aren't sitting on a shelf somewhere that you just pull them off. I mean, the motor component is one thing, the electrical component's another. It'll have to be put together. I mean, realistically, it would be minimum 2 months after we ordered it that we would have this on site, minimum. And that would be if everything worked out right. So we're going to rent for June and July of next year. We've already rented for 1 month. We're in for $18K already towards a, you know, $38,000 unit. We didn't plan this. It happened. So our goal is to either to get an answer from you, which direction you want us to go. If you don't fund this now, we're going to come back and ask for an interim, because we have to get the money for the rental that we currently, we owe $7,000 on the rental. We owe $1,900 on the electrical component, and we will have to rent for 2 more months. So we're going to come back and ask for that money anyway, one way or another. So we're just here to vet this now, bring it to you as soon as we, you know, it happened in the month of August. So as soon as we know, so that we have a direction for next year. But I don't, you can finance it however you want or not. I mean, it's just, we will work it out one way or another. We do need the primary electrical source for the island, so.
Joe, for a constantly running generator, what's a useful life of one this size? Is it?
This one?
Yeah.
Actually, we've been very fortunate with this kind of generator. It gets well maintained by our staff out there, plus we take it off the island and services it in-house during the winter months. So this is, this is a little bit unusual 20 years, because we only really run it for 3.5 months
Right.
out of every year.
Right.
But if it were continuous running, it would be it'd have a lifespan of about maybe 5-6 years,
So we're
which we're
right
right
on.
in that area right now.
You're right in that range.
I mean, since we don't run it on a continuous basis, we can get that kind of longevity out of the unit.
So is Island Beach closed now, or when does it close?
Close today. So we'll be running on the backup
One more
10K.
ferry out, and then we close.
Make sure everybody gets off.
Last ferry's at 6 o'clock. Who wants to go?
It's gone. No, it's not gone. Okay.
All right, any other questions on that one?
Thank
All right,
you.
next item is PR2, Parks and Rec, $15,000 additional appropriation to replace the steel work boat.
We've had some prior conversation about this at the budget committee meetings, and maybe even at another, a budget committee meeting. And we've been looking for a used workboat, and we haven't been too successful. So Jeff, through some negotiation and some looking at some of the local vendors, has an outline on a specification for a small workboat. The problem is that because it is not in the used market, the cost will be approximately $40,000 for the boat, and we would need an additional $15,000 to actually purchase the boat. Jeff has some technical information if you'd like to ask him about the design features, what it would be used for, et cetera.
No,
No.
they haven't gotten it.
But
So-
we do have a, we do have the ability to purchase something. Jeff, why don't you just give a little blurb about it?
Give us the schedule too for that, the timeline for getting the boat.
Well, right now.
Jeff, you gotta talk. Here.
We started looking into this in 2014 to replace a boat called the Goose, which is our third of our workboat. We have 3 workboats. It's a number 3 boat, smaller version. It's used mostly for pushing docks, moving people, but it has to have the capabilities to go out to Island Beach as well as go over for Todd's Point, and we also use it as a backup and a secondary ice-breaking boat to keep the channel open for the police docks and whatnot throughout the season. I looked into the used boat market. I was hoping to get something from a marine construction company or somebody like that we could save on costs and get something in the used market, but we weren't able to find anything that really fit the bill, that could do everything we needed it to do. And at the same time, it's kind of an 18-foot workboat is kind of small. I found companies who had 30-footers and they build you a 100-footer, but something that small that we could utilize. We also needed it small enough to be able to maneuver in the marinas and stuff, so a larger boat just didn't make sense. I looked at private sellers, went on Soundings Trade, Boats and Harbors, met with some people from the Connecticut Marine Trades, looking around and couldn't really come up with anything. At that point, we looked market. I met with a couple builders locally. We wanted the ability to keep the manufacturer local so it could be part of the build-out process. We didn't want to order a boat from Washington or Louisiana, which is primarily where these boats are made nowadays, because you can't have any hands-on input when you're having the boat built. They basically give you something off the shelf. And we also wanted the ability we didn't want to incur shipping costs to ship a boat literally across the country. And I found a company in Long Island called Sound Marine who's done a few of these particular boats. There are 3 of them located in the city of New Rochelle. We actually went out on them, took all the guys out on them, field tested them, put them out through their paces, realized this was the boat that we could really utilize. It met all our criteria. Sat down with the boat builder, did some discussions, some modification stuff we didn't need, we didn't want to buy, and we came up with this plan here. Tom has copies of it, of what we were proposing, some pictures of the actual vessel we'd be purchasing.
How much?
The actual vessel, all said and done, powered with all the cables, props, the works, the engine, everything, is $60,000.
60,000.
Yeah. We have 25 in the boat budget and 20 in the engine budget, so we're 15 short on where we wanted to go. And initially, again, the original thought, my thought was that the 25 for a used boat and 20 for a new engine would get us into the market. If anybody owns a boat knows that the engine is almost more of a key component than the hull itself. But we just weren't able to find anything that was, it merited spending any kind of money on that was worthwhile, so. And that's where we're at. And it's been about an 18-month process. I wasn't going to buy something. I didn't want to buy a boat that met half our criteria. We wanted to find something that really fit the bill so that we'd keep it around for a while and fit its niche. So.
Questions?
I do. Leslie?
Go ahead.
I'll ask Pete or Roland. Did we plan to finance this asset in this year's budget, or was this a cash expenditure? I assume it was going to be financed, and this piece will be, no?
No,
Not gonna be financed?
it's too small.
Too small. And then I want to make one other comment. Once again, it's helpful if there's some information supporting these, the way Caroline does. She comes in with a lot, but just in the page to give us a better description, so we can have a better understanding as we review the package would be very constructive in the future.
Okay.
Really?
Just remind us again, how old was the existing boat?
The Goose was a steel boat, and I couldn't get a date on it. It preceded my predecessor. And as anyone knows, steel and salt water eventually just, especially with the high electrolysis rate we have in the harbor here, it just, the steel got eaten away over the years. We scrapped it. We pulled it out and scrapped it. It went to the scrapyard. It was just
Oh, it's
not
gone.
repairable. Yeah,
Okay.
it was not repairable.
And, other shoreline communities, do they use 18-footers? What do they typically use for the same kind of work?
Typically, the same sort of thing, but Greenwich is unique in the facilities we have here. Most municipalities don't have 4 marinas. They don't have a police dock that's open year-round. Most communities with small marine facilities close up for the winter, so they don't have that aspect of the ice breaking. They don't have islands. We move docks from one side of town to the other. In the winter, we haul docks and buy them. And we need something small that we can maneuver within the marinas. The entire marina in Byram goes out of the water in the winter because of its exposure in the off-season with the easterlies. So you can't even bring a medium-sized workboat in there. It just doesn't maneuver. So.
I'll just throw in a comment. At Riverside Yacht Club, they were looking for a replacement of one of the club-owned boats, and they looked in the used market for over 2 years and just couldn't find the right type of boat. So they tried. So appreciate the work.
I was sad to see the Bear go, though.
How long does it take on the order process? If you place an order, how long does it take to get the boat?
He said it would probably take 2 to 3 months to build one, but we'd have to get on his schedule. And that's the key. Most of these boat builders won't give you any timeline or any commitment until they get their first payment up front.
So the one you test drove is owned by somebody else?
Yes,
That's not
the city of New Rochelle ordered one of these for they have a very, very similar facility to us inside in their marina operation. And they also have, they use one for their harbor master and their marina operations. They also have 2 dive and mooring operators that have identical boats in the harbor there that are using them. So we got a real good feedback and got a chance to go out in a couple of them and actually put your hands on them, drive them, go out in different sea states. And so that was good.
Like a Hinckley.
Not quite. No teak. No teak on these boats.
Okay.
Stay with me. I'm sympathetic to the desire to be able to keep a hand on the production of it and things, but I'm looking in your handout at the contract price that New York State paid, New Rochelle paid, Promar paid for the 18-foot bull shark, which is what this is, varies a lot. I mean, we're
Yeah,
paying 60, but they paid 38, 34, 5,
The one
55.
for New Rochelle, they went outside for their own engine.
So this was the
The
price without the engine.
34.5 was just for the boat.
Is there value to us nevertheless going to some of these vendors from Louisiana and these other places to find out what the competitive price would be from them?
I did look at one guy up in upstate, he was in Chester, Connecticut, that offered to build the same boat for around the same price, but quite honestly, I went, found where he'd built some other boats and went to those locations and looked at his work, and it wasn't
Wasn't as good
comparable.
as this.
No, and really, when you're dealing with an aluminum welded boat, your welding is the important thing, and you have to, and I wanted to be able to, if not myself, if a representative from the town, stop in from time to time and watch this boat go together, because a lot of stuff gets welded over, you never see it once it's enclosed. And it's structural, and you want to make sure it's done right, otherwise you're going to find out 15 years later, and by then it's too late to have any comeback, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you, gentlemen. All right, next on the agenda is PW1, Department of Public Works, 1.6 million release of conditions for the Byram Pool Master Plan construction. I will start off by reading our conditions for this segment. If you remember, we had set aside 9.5 million in the budget. 40,000 was given immediately for A&E services. The next tranche, if you will, was 1.6 million, subject to release upon review and approval by the BET of plans and contractor bids for remediation work, site work, and plans and contractor bids for demolition of existing buildings and structures. So that's what we're talking about at this point. I did ask Alan after we review this part of it, where he is on some of the construction drawings and starting to get some estimates on that. So let's talk about the site and the demolition.
Okay, we constructed a bid proposal to remediate 120,000 square feet of soil in Byram Park down to 1.5 feet. We also included the demolition of the pool and the existing pool building, removal of several of the utilities in the park, storm drain, catch basin, stuff that would be contrary to the construction of the new pool. We are only putting soil back in the areas that will be the park and not in the areas where the pool construction will be, so we're not paying twice. We did go to competitive bid. We had 9 bidders respond. The lowest bid was at $1,162,812. The bids range from that low of 1.1 to 3 million. 8 of the bidders were under 1.9 million.
So the highest was 3 million, you said?
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm sorry, when were these bids due?
Yesterday.
So you'll be able to level all the bids and they're all apples to
We
apples?
did it this morning, and it looks like our low bidder is a competent low bidder. He has worked for the town before.
Great. Alan, what's the schedule for this? I mean, when does he get going?
He can't get going. I can't even tell purchasing to start until you guys release the money, so I'm assuming that next week you'll take a vote. Upon a successful vote, I will tell purchasing that DPW recommends going to the low bidder. They will proceed in constructing a contract. Hopefully that contract can be completed before the end of October, in which he'll immediately begin. I already talked to him about scheduling today when we had a teleconference with purchasing and the vendor, and he said he's all prepared to start this job. We're going to try to work the job concurrently. As part of the demolition, we did test for asbestos in the pool house and the pool. We did, of course, find some asbestos. That's also included in this bid.
To remediate the asbestos.
Yes.
Amy, remind us the pump situation down there. And that may be unrelated to this specifically, but Was there an issue with the pump?
I mean, the one that Joe was asking about
Yeah,
last year?
yeah.
Because the pool's been closed, the pump is not an issue no more.
Okay.
It'll go.
But it's got to go.
It's going, and that's,
part of the,
and that's part of this
yeah,
contract, too.
the sewer pump I'm talking about, yeah.
Okay.
Was it?
Are you have the same contractor doing both the remediation work and the demolition, or are they subbing one of those?
No, the same, right now, there's no indication that there's a subcontractor. I understand that the low bidder does maintain a Connecticut demolition license. It's essential that he does both because the way the pool building's constructed, it hangs over the soil. So I can't, there's like sort of like a little dance that has to be done. The building has to be demolished, the debris dumped in the old pool, in the empty pool, so they could load it out of the pool without touching the soil, then attack the soil, and then remove the foundations, remove the pool down to below 3 feet below grade, and then they're going to actually replace the soil per the final plans of the pool, which were, that site plan was completed already. So the capping of the pool and bringing it to the elevation that the engineer has suggested as part of the pool plan has been incorporated into this bid.
And what are you asking for the release of today? You're not asking for the full 1.6 million then, or are you?
I'm asking for the 1.6 million
When you have a bid of $1,162,000 to do the work?
contingency.
How much of a contingency do you think you need to hold on this?
When you want inspection and what?
I have to, actually, the soil removal was, the soil remediation was 1.3. I guess there was 3 million somewhere along the line for demolition.
Yeah. But these are estimated figures of yours.
Yeah, they're
and now you're
estimated
getting
figure.
bids,
And
yeah.
because when I put the release in, I put it in for what you guys told me to put it in for.
No, We were acting based upon your estimated figures. Now you're getting bids.
So now you want to take some,
No, no,
hey,
I'm asking you the
guys
question.
do what you want. I mean,
You're the guy with the skill in the field. I'm asking you, what do you really need? I'll respect contingency. Tell me about what you really need. Do you need $1.6 million?
I mean, if I don't even know if I could change the request for appropriation. I'm just going by what you guys wrote.
Do you have
So I mean,
enough-
if you were saying I use a smaller number, you want to make it 1.5, yeah, sure.
Al?
Roland or Pete, how does this usually work?
The numbers were just an estimate at that time.
May I just ask?
Related.
Well, okay,
No,
wait, hold on. Go ahead.
So related to this, as part of the 4 steps of conditions that we have is a redrawing and sort of that menu of options that the Budget Committee and then the BET had asked for last winter. Do you have enough money for architects and
There
engineering for
was
that?
never a representation that we would redraw the drawings.
Okay.
I distinctly said that I would continue with the drawings and find options to reduce the cost. And the drawings are now at 90%. I received them last Thursday, and I'm going through the drawings and making my comments right now. To go from 90% to 100% is basically my review and the architect making my final comments that I have on the set of drawings, and then it's 100% done. We're going through those drawings right now to try to find any value-added items that were missed or we could add. And then we've also engaged over the summer, we asked the architect to hire at an additional cost of $12,000 to hire a professional estimator to go through the drawings. We have not received that number yet.
Does the $40,000 that we, I'm sorry, does the $40,000 that we granted to you outright, are those funds sufficient for you to be doing all of what you just described on the
The
drawings?
$40,000 was to replace the $40,000 that we consume for soil testing.
Yes.
That money was placed back in the contract for the A&E, and that has been taking place already.
Al, my question's a little different. I want to be sure. I'm sorry, I'm parsing with the figures. I'm looking at the fact that I could take your $1,162,000, I could give you a 20% contingency, and I could cover all that at $1,400,000. But I want to be sure that I've given you also the money you need to be able to continue to do the work on the drawings that you just described, including bringing 90% to the 100%, and including also to come up with the schematics. This is what we talked about at $6 million.
So to complete the drawings as originally scoped by our engineering firm, we have all the money in place.
Okay.
The $40,000 ended that. They will comply with drawings and specifications at 100%, no issue.
Okay.
If we need to go back, because, say, the estimate is not what everybody's expecting, we're talking about a complete redesign of this project. It has to go back through planning and zoning. It has to go back before Architectural Review Commission. It would have to go back before the Junior League. It would have to go back before Parks and Rec, because we'd have to restart reducing things. So I'm not sure, a redesign or a schematic, to really get the numbers, you're talking about pretty much a complete architectural redesign.
You're getting ahead of us, Al.
Well,
I mean,
that's what
I don't-
you're asking,
No, no,
you
no,
know.
I'm not asking you for anything here. I'm only trying to recap where we are.
Okay.
Where we are right now is with a request for the release of the funds necessary to do the demolition and the remediation. A very capable guy by the name of Al Manelli came up with a rough guess, and he said to us at the time it was a rough guess, and he used a number of $1,600,000. But the figure will be refined by the arrival of bids, and now you have some bids, some of which are higher, but by the grace of God, we've got some that are lower, including the lowest one, which seems to be very agreeable to you. And so now I'm trying to figure out exactly what you need. I want to give you the funds you need, but I don't want to release more than you need. I don't want to get ahead of the game just because Al Manelli gave us a rough guess back at the beginning of play. The schematics, what our conditions asked for, as I recall it, much of it came from Mark, and if I'm misquoting Mark, Mark will step in. But as I understand it, we were to complete the plans at least to 90%, perhaps to 100%. And to satisfy some questions, you're also going to come up with some schematics of some possible alternatives so people who might have had other things in their mind can weigh whether or not they like alternatives better. None of that requires going back to planning and zoning and wetlands or anybody else. It was just to show some schematics of some possibilities, and you'd only have to deal with those land use compliance issues if in fact we're going to change a plan, which is nobody's plan right now.
We're not going to need schematics to do that. You're going to basically need a pair of scissors.
All right, but it sounds like when we get to the point where we start looking at your plans and your estimates and all that, and if we want to know to save $400,000, you know, would you reduce the size of this building or take out the grill?
Right,
out
if
of
we
it,
had
you
to do
know?
that, if you're getting into that kind of detail, yes. What we would end up doing is, if the building size has to reduce for some reason, you take something out of the building, we could talk about a number, but then we're going to have to refund or make a change notice to the architect and the engineering firm to redo the drawings and simultaneously go back through planning and
Okay,
zoning.
no, so I think we understand that, and I think there may be some additional costs to it. I mean, we're hoping not to have a big elaborate change, but maybe, Jeff, what you're trying to get at is if we allocated, say, 1.4 million, there's an extra 200,000 that maybe we have at our disposal to use later on for some changes or to go towards the total cost of the project.
And the 1.4 million is your $1,162,000 times with an extra 20%, rounded to the nearest round number. 1.4 gives you your bid plus 20%. And 20% is, I mean, this is your field, not mine, but I'm thinking that's not a bad
No,
contingency.
I don't have a problem with that. I said, it's your, you know, I'm just going by what the numbers we put in. I couldn't, when I filled out the application for the release, I had no number. All I had was the 1.6. I don't know if I'm even going to change that number. I guess you guys could reduce it, so if you want to reduce it to 1.5, that's fine. I don't know if that'll be enough to cover it. If you wanted to, you know, it'll be a good 20%. I mean, we do have unit pricing in case we have to remove some soil here and there. I don't see an issue if you want to do that.
It's making some progress on our
Oh,
aspiration.
excuse me,
that-
we do also have funds that we had calculated and estimated to have an on-site inspector of $40,000 also. That has to be accounted for.
So that's on top of the 162?
No, that was in the 1.6.
That's in there, okay. Yeah.
It would go on top of the.
If you're going to give me 20%, you'd have to put the extra 40 in.
Well, 20% on the,
Still, at 1.4 will still cover it.
yeah.
I was going to ask another question, but just differently.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you get a breakdown between the
Sure I
broke it
did.
down. And, you know, if you took those numbers, which again, this came with no backup, what normally might you use for, as a contingency for demolition, you know, under other circumstances in town? And what would you, under other circumstances, use as your percent for contingency on environmental remediation? And then, you know, let's just come up, you know, Jeff, with a number that would more, you know, make sure that it normally reflects what our normal process would be.
They broke down the demolition and the soil remediation, and which includes the transportation and disposal cost. They also added in the cost to put the soils back.
Right.
Again, you're dealing with 10,000 tons of soil. As we're stripping away, our testing indicates that at 18 inches below the current grass surface, will be within our limit, but we'll be constantly testing. That's why the on-site inspector will be there. The cost of demolition was $43,000 for the pool and the pool building. The removal of the arsenic contaminated soil and its disposal was $707,000. And the installation and replacement soils, grading and seeding was $412,500.
And so, you know, between the two of you, you have a lot of experience in this area. What might be your normal contingency on any of those? I mean, I can remember on MESA, we structured it on soils, not as a percent, but as a dollar. And that turned out to be extremely helpful because we ended up, quite frankly, with a larger number and it was needed, you know. I want
Based
to
on
make
everything
sure,
else I do,
mean,
the 20% is fine for this. I'm not concerned about that.
So $1,162,000 plus 40,000 plus an extra 20% on all of it, including the 40,000,
more than-
is $1,450,000, a little less than $1,450,000.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Al, you mentioned before about how much soil you're going to put in, and there's a little dance you have to do given where the pool foundation is going to be. Is your estimate for all of the soil you're eventually going to need to replace on site, or are you going to need more soil later? So this is everything. Okay. And all of the hauling that needs to be done to Hamden, is that right?
No, it's going to Perth Amboy.
Oh, it's
With this vendor, it's going to Perth Amboy.
my home state of New Jersey, of course. That's where it's going.
Is that the Kiwanis coming
That's Brooklyn.
And that's it? That's all the hauling, that's all the removal?
We got so detailed in this estimate that they have to put the soil back at the same elevation that the park is now, and we even gave them the compaction figures. So they have to come, as the soil's coming in, you know, if you just dump a pile of dirt on the ground, it could be this high, and then you compact it, it could be that high. They're required by the contract, by the specifications, to put the dirt back at the same elevation that it is today,
Compacted.
after compaction.
Now, will they be involved later on after all the construction's done, finishing the site work, or is that a different
No.
contract?
What they're going to leave the site is along the line of the pool, they're going to leave silt fencing and snow fencing constructed around the site where the pool construction is going to be. They have the hydroseeding of the soil, of the new soils from that fence to the beach, so that next spring or next summer, we can open the beach back up, or that section of the beach back up. They'll be complete.
Okay, just curious. Yeah.
The supervision you're going to have, is that inspector, whatever, AEPOC?
No, it's going to be our environmental consultant that was doing all the Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, and health assessment.
In your
He's a town
expression-
service contractor. He's on contract with us right now. He has all the insurances and all the necessary documentation to do that work.
And your expression for him was site inspector. Is that the expression you're using?
He makes sure that the amount of soil going out is the amount of soil going out.
This is not as complicated a remediation as something like Greenwich High School either, fortunately.
All right, let's, if we can, you already kind of started talking through a little bit on the next stage of plans and all that. Is there any more to add to that, or do you want to
No, the
Right,
drawings
right.
are very detailed. There's almost 120 individual drawings. A lot of site work, landscaping, of course, the parking lot and the rock removal, the new buildings, the pool, all the site utilities. We've had several meetings over the summer between the engineering group, on-site meetings with the utility companies. Very innovative in a couple of ideas on how to put utilities into the park, because, you're kind of isolated from Rich Avenue there. And basically, the building that we had approved, they designed. So now I'm going back through those drawings, marking them up as I go. We're having a telecon tomorrow with all the disciplines, talk about some of the things I found. And then I should be getting that estimate sometime this week, that professional estimators, what he thinks it's worth. I hope to address some of that. Then I'll be calling them back to address some of those items to see what we can do. We constructed the drawings with a lot of add alternates so that we could pick and choose. It's really going to determine, what's really going to determine this is a bid.
But the bid will have add alternates too, right?
The bid always has add alternates. I mean, even in this soil bid, we had unit pricing, so if we have to take out more soil than needed, there's a cost that I don't have to be, I'm not at somebody's
Here.
whim, I'm covered, so.
Back here again.
We cover everything, but we're looking at a lot of different ways to try to keep the cost in control.
All right, so when will you be ready to come back to us to go through all that? I mean, our next budget committee meeting is October 13th. Does that timing work?
Or sooner, if you guys had something going, I could do that sooner.
I mean, we will
possibly.
talk about later whether we might have a special meeting specifically for budget guidelines. Might be October 5th. We'll
That might
talk
be-
about that a little bit later.
That might be doable.
But if that's an option too, you and I can stay in touch and see what.
Yeah, that could be probably
I
done.
mean, we realize there's a little bit of timing that's critical in terms of going the next step and getting ready for, the actual construction, so. So is that
One of the
kind
things that, just so you guys have it in your mind too, is it doesn't harm us to take the drawings in whatever condition they are to bid, and going for add alternates, and seeing what the traffic will bear, because we can guess purchasing to hold the bids for 120 days, similar to what we did with these. And then, an estimator is covering his butt just like an engineer does. A contractor's looking to get a job.
It'd be nice to bid it over the winter.
So ideally, Al, in the end, we don't want this to go an extra summer, right?
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying, because if we, let's just say, for talking's sake, we look at the drawings and you guys are not happy, and we have to go and do another schematic, well, now you're delaying.
Right.
It's delaying everything. This is a really good time to bid before the holidays. If you remember, we got our most favorable pricing from the Central Fire Station at this time. It's when you bid later in the year, the contractors are getting set for their spring work, and they're too busy to bid.
So let's go ahead.
In order to go out to bid, though, do we need to have approved a certain amount of allocation, or can we do that after we see the bids? Actually, I mean, the way we wrote the guidelines, I think we had.
You
to see
actually, the
bids.
way you wrote the guidelines, you said upon approved
Upon
bids.
approval, yeah, okay.
So you're asking me to bid.
Yeah,
So we're actually doing this other step just to assure you of what path we're taking.
all right, well, so maybe, the best course is one step at a time. If we have a special meeting on October 5th and Alan is ready, we can go through some of that, or maybe on the 13th, but either way, it'll be helpful, I think, for all of us to be able to, see where you're at, what the estimate is.
We
Well,
noticed,
with the understanding, maybe the actual bidding might be the next appropriate step.
when you notice
Can I
the
just
special
ask-
meeting, the agenda has to show his item as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Al, can you just give us a better idea on your timeline, when you expect to, obviously, you're going to start the documentation, so, but when you would expect this, actual project to start, and what your estimated completion
On the
of
soil?
remediation? On the soil.
The soil, the bidder
That
bid,
wasn't
the
in-
bidder, hold on, the bidder bid 85 days to completion, obviously, because of soil, that's a lot of that contingency is contingent on the weather.
Right.
I would expect him to do that. I don't see why he couldn't complete within 85 days. So 85 days is going to put him in the dead of winter, though. So we're going to probably have to delay until late March, early April to hydroseed. He's hydroseeding by contract, by specification, as he completes his cells. We're doing this, it's not going to be a complete strip. He's stripping by cells, 100 by 100 cells. So he's allowed to strip out 3 cells in the course of so many days, get that soil removed, and to start bringing approved soil back, spreading it, compacting it, and hydroseeding it. So hopefully that some of that could be done before the winter really sets in, so a majority of the park will have grass growing.
Right.
Especially if we concentrate on the beach side of the park.
But none of this delays the next step.
No,
You
this
can
is
be-
all,
You can be preparing the stuff to
Yeah,
get bids, we can be looking at bids, we can be
definitely. It's not
approving bids.
concurrent.
It doesn't matter whether we have
Or it
good
is
weather or bad
concurrent,
weather
yeah.
with this contract, right? Wendy?
one's not dependent, there's enough time there,
Exactly.
one's not
Okay,
dependent
so
on
let's
anything.
And
move
the
forward.
buildings are done first before the soil, right?
One, just the pool building
Pool house.
is going to be done first, and the pool, they could work on that because of the asbestos while they start stripping the soil from the other side of the park.
And the pool itself goes last.
Pool itself goes last.
Okay.
And that's not a complete demo, they're just going to cave it into 3 feet.
Okay, but you're satisfied that if we approve $1,450,000, you've got all you need to do what you need to do?
I think that's fine.
Okay. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan.
Mike?
Just on one note on this project, we had conversations with the RTM about including them as far as drawings, bids, operational plan, and access plan. And I just want to make sure that at about the time we're doing that, I want to be able to bundle that type of package and be able to send off to the RTM. Because this was one of those where they allowed us to sort of control this one and not just do the 80 in year 1 for the timeline. I just want to remind everybody that, that's still a plan. I hope we honor it. So that's access plan for the
Yeah.
pool, park plan, the drawings, any renderings and everything, all that stuff. So I just want to make sure we're keeping consistent on that. And I think that's a better relationship to, keep going, especially if we do run into any challenges. Right now, it seems like we're coming in a little bit under our estimate. So I just want to make sure we follow through on that.
Just because I know that's part of it, Joe and I have been talking, we talk about the pool at least once a week. He can't complete a lot of the requirements that you're asking him until we have an approved plan, because a lot of the operational costs obviously depend on the size of the pool and the size of the operation.
Right.
So until we have a plan, he can't do his step.
Right.
Okay?
All right, but even so, I think we're going to want to hear more about who's allowed in the pool, who's not. I mean, is it town residents only, is it non? And we don't need to talk about it now, but whether that's up to the first selectman or whoever, but that's probably going to be part of the discussion too.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Alan, just one other thing. Whatever information you get to us ahead of time is really beneficial for us to be able to read through it, or at least, I know it may be last minute, but information beforehand is helpful.
I would also add, it might be helpful just to have one sheet for the full BEP meeting, something attached to this. Just
Thank you.
I mean, you and I can talk more about that, but,
Thank you, Alan. You're good.
Okay.
okay. All right, next item on the agenda, FD1, fire, release of conditions, $455,547 overtime. Chief, Assistant Chief, welcome. I'll also note that with us in the audience, Sandy Kornberg. There you are. Do you want to tell us who else is here with the volunteer chiefs?
Ed Fox, Impact, Aaron Stone, Dave Walker, Fire and Sound Beach.
Okay, great. Just as a little background, a lot of this evolves around the memorandum of understanding that's been undertaken for the last year.
Yeah.
between the administration, well, maybe 2 years, between the volunteers and administration. We've heard from the fire department in the past about other initiatives to include the volunteers and have better working relationships. So really, we're here to kind of understand where you guys are now, and if there's some way to resolve this MOU and some of the outstanding issues with that. So Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so just to rehash where we were at the end or beginning of the summer, I guess, there was a draft version of the MOU that came back from the law department where the town attorney had commented on the signatures of departments or a department. The departments, companies of Byram and Sound Beach still took exception to not being able to sign the MOU as an identifiable department. These individual companies, as we've discussed, are all chartered as departments in the state of Connecticut, and these two particular companies wish to sign as departments. Wayne's language, the feedback we got on Wayne's language was it was a bit, I guess, harsh maybe is a term. It wasn't palatable to the companies at that time. So knowing people were on vacation in the summer, we didn't think we'd get to a lot of issues until September. And over the past 2 weeks, we actually think we've got to a workaround that still has to be bounced off of Wayne Fox. Assistant Chief Tim Peck from Sound Beach was in the office last week, and we talked about a workaround that seemed to be palatable to the gentleman from Byram, which emails got lost in a spam folder, I believe, of Assistant Chief Walkout. But we just discussed the issue in the lobby, and I think we're conceptually there as far as the sign-in page goes. And what it's going to entail, quite simply, is we're going to format the MOU as it exists so that the bottom of the MOU will have a space for the fire chief, and Fire Commissioner Peter Tessie has expressed a wish to sign it as well. We'll, in a sense, be endorsing the MOU. Turn the page over, and the endorsement by the volunteer entities will follow, and those volunteer entities would be able to sign as companies and departments as they see fit. And I mean, you can speak directly to the members of Sound Beach and Byram who are in attendance, but we think that will work. And I just want to make sure that I can bounce that off of the town attorney and make sure he's comfortable with the fact that we, in fact, are endorsing the MOU and not necessarily the individual organizations, while being respectful to those organizations as well. That's the sign-in issue that had been the holdup with the MOU. The remainder of the document that you've gotten, an Excel spreadsheet with the breakdown of those issues, have been being worked on. They're either completed or they're in process or continuing process. And if you had any specific questions to that, we could comment as well. But I think we're there.
Okay. Sandy?
Right, that's correct. The remainder of the document, as it was drafted, has been endorsed by all the parties. So we're good to go.
Sandy's from Costco, right?
No, Sandy's Glenville.
Oh, Glenville,
Yep.
sorry.
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get an encouraging word from Byram and Sound Beach that what you discussed out in the corridor does seem like it's a solution.
Yeah, we're comfortable with it.
You're comfortable with it.
Yeah,
So,
Byram, we talked about it at our last meeting. I'm Ed Fox, I'm the vice president. And
thank
as
you, Ed.
long
Nice to meet you.
as the MOU stands as South Beach wrote it, and we were able to sign it as the Byram Volunteer Fire Department, which we're incorporated as, this was acceptable.
Okay. Can I propose this? I would, Mr. Chairman, I would propose that we postpone this to the next meeting, that the matter be submitted to the town attorney and come back to us at that time with the blessing of the town attorney. In the interim, I'd be grateful if we could receive a copy tomorrow, whenever you've created it, whenever you've reduced it to writing, if we could see a copy of whatever it is that you're submitting to the town attorney for his approval. I'd like there to be a single draft, which Byram is suggesting is satisfactory to them, Sound Beach is suggesting they're satisfactory to them, and the town department is indicating it's satisfactory to them too. give that to the town attorney. Let's have a copy of that. That work for you, Mr. Chairman?
If you're all comfortable, with- I mean,
I'm fine.
you're working on this, it's kind of a work in progress document, right?
It's fine.
I mean, if that's, okay?
So I want to make sure I understand. So Jeff, you're saying defer the first quarter release of overtime funds. So I guess the next question is, that isn't an issue for you? You have sufficient funds that you don't
Yes.
need this release? So-
Yes, they're okay.
It's the same position we were in last year in the first quarter.
It would be good until May or June.
They're fine.
We're not going to May or June. You're going to come back in October.
I guess just two things, as you're talking, if there is still a concern, you might pose the option of a side letter of some sort, whereby Wayne writes to these two companies who are incorporated as departments, just giving his view, I don't want to use the word opinion, on what he thinks signing the signature line with that really means. And that, that may give some comfort to Wayne as well, and hopefully that's completely outside of this, which you all worked so hard on, and hopefully that would be acceptable as just a backup option. And while you're here, guys, if you could just 2 minutes on, the 4 or 5 areas that you've been working with the volunteers on, just to update us what's been going on since the last time you updated us.
Sure. I'll work off of that. I didn't send you a new one because a lot hasn't changed, that Excel spreadsheet that we sent. Like I said, for some time, most of the items are actually have already been executed and are in place now. The annual joint training calendar, it's posted. It's a Google calendar. You guys can have access to it if you'd like. That's been in place for about 2 years now. The training center policy, so the volunteers can use it on their own accord at their own time. That's been in place since shortly after the training center opened. These are the things you were asking about, right?
Yep.
Okay. The Firefighter 1 course has been completed by Deputy Chief Roberts in the training division. And I think they had about a 90% or plus pass rate of the candidates that attended. Excellent class. It was well received by the volunteer companies. Continue to evaluate and implement various technologies. Obviously, we're always trying to improve there. We have all the programs and software. I am responding, Zello, the text pagers, and the regular volunteer pagers. Continue to evaluate, implement various technologies for documentation, incident responses, and that's obviously ongoing. Administrative policies, when it's appropriate, we do send out a copy in advance to the volunteer companies, district chiefs anyway, for input on those. Let's see what else. We are starting to work with, a group of volunteers to develop what we've called the cafeteria plan for benefits, if you will, the medical insurance and that type of thing. We haven't had really a lot of time. We've had the time, but the group of volunteers that are managing that plan are starting to develop that, really haven't gotten together enough to come and sit with us to start discussing those options, whatever they would like. If they'd like $2,000 towards college, or a contribution towards medical insurance or something along those lines, we're open to any of those options, whatever suits their needs best. I know volunteer recruitment and retention officer Brian Kelly has been involved in that, so we're open for anything along those lines.
When we last looked at the spreadsheet, one of the first items was talking about the joint training, and I think the notation on the Excel spreadsheet, as we saw it the last time we were together, talked about still sort of in the future tense that we're beginning to put together the joint training schedule. Now, in the intervening time, what joint training has taken place?
Initially, we started the joint training. It was, we scheduled 3 sessions. I think the last time we had spoken with Larry Roberts, the attendance was down. I think the last one was at Sound Beach, and the attendance was down. I know Larry is working with the volunteer training officers to develop a schedule, but we still train, please correct me if I'm wrong, second Wednesday?
Third Wednesday.
Third Wednesday?
Fourth Thursday.
Fourth Thursday of the month. There are, at times, that's primarily volunteers. There are, at times, career staff does attend, but that's still being, developed with the training officers from the respective companies, if you will.
And at the fire training tower, what joint training with involving both career and volunteers taking place there?
A lot of the practical evolutions for the firefighter 1 class that was just wrapped up about 2 months ago. There was career staff involvement with the delivery of those segments.
Training together.
Yeah, it's the delivery of the firefighter 1 segment. A lot of the career personnel, I think 4 or 5 of the career personnel were involved with the delivery of the firefighter 1 class, which is obviously 180 hours of firefighter 1, I believe, was that training segment. So a lot of it's classroom, though. It's not all practical evolutions. But, we are still working on a schedule. It's tough, to get the volunteers at certain times, during the day. Obviously, for training, the career staff primarily trains Monday through Friday during the day. So we are working on developing a good schedule that works for everybody, and I don't think there's been any real issues as far as I can see.
Okay, well, that's going to remain important to me. I mean, I
understand.
I've never been a firefighter, but I have it in my head that the
Sure.
ability to merge the efforts of career and volunteer people will be predicated in part on whether or not they trained with each other and have confidence in each other and know each other on a personal plane. And when they're there next to each other at a fire scene,
Sure.
they have the confidence and rapport to work with each other, not two isolated groups. Now, I may be wrong about that, but I'm stuck on that.
I
And I'm going
understand.
to keep asking that question.
I would defer if are you the training officer for Byram? Who's the training officer for Byram? Okay. Sound Beach? Okay.
I think what you stated is quite accurate. By all intents, because this has been discussed for a long time, and by all intents, every effort, serious effort is being made to do exactly what Bob has mentioned.
I think it's more, it's not it's more of a logistics issue than a principal issue. I think all parties do agree, and
But I want to resolve the logistics. I know I have scheduling problems. I know that
Right.
these are people who are living different lives from each other.
Sure.
But I want to find a way to make that happen.
Sure.
Okay.
Bob, can you give us any examples where there's evidence of better coordination, cooperation in the field,
I'll take
and any incidents?
Yesterday. I'll give you the example of yesterday with the unfortunate incident at the marina. Obviously, a multi-department event. Proud to say that the divers that were in the water were fire department divers. Those fire department divers were from the Sound Beach Fire Company.
I don't know what happened yesterday. What happened yesterday?
Well, a car went into the marina at Costco.
unfortunately, a person, drowned.
I'm sorry.
So that was a cohesive response, and certainly not only volunteer and career people working side by side in water, out of water, but the police department and GEMS as well, cohesively as an example of the benefits of what's going on.
There's been many, either fortunately or unfortunately, in the last, 4 to 6 weeks, we've had many rescue situations. We had another unfortunate, well, not fortunate, the man wasn't seriously injured, but a man fell down in about 11:30 on a Friday night. I think it was September 4th, down into the Byram River, down 85 feet into the river, and we got calls of a man screaming for help. It was a career and volunteer contingent that responded. I listened to the tapes today. Engine 41 responded with volunteer staff. We had to set up a somewhat significant haul system to lower rescuers down to the water, retrieve the victim out of the water. He was injured and I believe somewhat intoxicated, and set up a haul system, and it was career and volunteer staff that worked together to bring him back up to the street level.
And it was Byram volunteers that were cooperating?
No, Glenville. Engine 41 was from Glenville. I just remember specifically hearing Engine 41 sign on with a contingent of volunteers. So I know that was a somewhat, lengthy operation, so.
Sandy, your description of the cooperation between career would be the same as what I just heard from you? Okay.
For sure.
Any fire incidents where there's been good cooperation?
And quiet.
We've had a lot of rescues, unfortunate rescues, but fire activity, nothing significant in the last, 30 to 45 days.
Okay.
Knock on wood. Our fire prevention department is doing well in that.
That's wood, but that's all right.
Okay, so it looks like we can plan on hearing from you guys next month in October. Hopefully this thing can be wrapped up. Unless you tell me that due to whatever technical glitch, but let's assume that can be a quick.
Yeah, the document itself
Okay.
is set and done. I mean, none of the material in the document, it's just really the signing thing. So as long as Wayne is on board with it,
Okay.
I don't
Get
anticipate.
it to him as quickly as you can,
Yeah, and send us a copy.
because it takes time to get an answer from both sides.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Volunteers, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Oh, here we go. Thank you. Thank you, Roland.
Need a magnifying glass for this. This is what was emailed to us, right? Yeah.
This is the same one, right?
Same thing? Okay.
This is NW2, Nathaniel Witherall, release of conditions of fund support of $600,000. Let me just get my things down here. Right here. Need it? You can have that.
Thank you.
Alan, Chris, thank you for coming. Let me try to summarize a concern we all have, concerns. And Roland can give you some backup numbers if, but for the fiscal year 16, we're looking at, in terms of the fund for Nathaniel Witherall.
Extra one. You need an extra one?
We have an extra here. Do you need one?
You need it? Here's another
Oh, do you need a copy yourself?
Sorry.
Okay. Guys, I'm all looking at the budget for fiscal year 16.
Yep.
We did some changes in the capital program. We actually did some bonding. But we were looking at the fund balance. Actually, net revenues, expenses was going to be roughly a positive $553,000, according to our plan for the budget 16. The budget for 2015 was going to have a shortfall of about $803,000. Am I correct in that, roughly? But we've gotten the actual numbers for 2015, where the shortfall is now roughly $3 million, which brings us to a fund balance of minus $3.5 million, roughly. So a lot has happened over the last few months since last we met. So the concern we have is obviously the ramping up of those deficits. But one of the reasons we wanted to meet with you guys today, important for us, is we're trying to write our budget guidelines. And you know, the initial budget that Roland has put together, we are showing the support, like this current fiscal year, of $2.4 million. But it looks like we may have to put in an additional $3.5 million to clean up the fund balance, the shortfall of that. We understand the auditors are going to be taking a keener look at this ongoing fund deficit. To put a reference on that, $3.5 million to throw into this estimated budget is a full 1 percentage point on a tax, mill rate tax increase. So if we were looking at trying to keep taxes at, say, 3% increase, we'd have to go to 4% just for Nathaniel Witherall on these shortfalls. So we want to understand what's going on. Now, I know maybe you can't give us all the information right now, and Chris, we appreciate this draft of what it's looking like, but we really got to start understanding what's going on, because the impact is huge for our setting the budget for next year.
Well, let me just make some opening comments. We understand that, you know, you've asked us to come here on a quarterly basis to give you some updates. We did have a conversation this morning with Roland to suggest that it would be easier for us to give you a first quarter look if we waited till October, because at this point, all we have is last year's closing numbers, 1 month of this fiscal year's results, and another month of preliminary results. So we're looking only at a very small slice of the whole year. And that portion of the year is a portion of the year that historically has higher level expenses than the average monthly run rate, because of the vacation period that occurs during July and August. So we'll do the best we can to address some of the issues that we have, and to talk to you about the run rate. But we're a little bit short on our facts and figures, because really we're only looking at 1 month of actual
And the second month that we have, which you have in front of you, is based on some preliminary numbers without some of the big numbers like our benefits costs.
Okay. But Alan, do you want to start with fiscal year 15? I mean, that seems like it's got a lot larger losses than we anticipated.
Right. Why don't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, the short answer about fiscal 15 is there were several things that happened. One was a gap in time where there were very limited month-to-month financial information coming out, limited or even none for the months of February, March, and April. So it was hard to gauge exactly what was happening during that period of time. I came on board in May and then had the catch-up process of trying to look back and generate revenues and look at allocated expenses over that period of time. So I think when we first came into you, it was very preliminary. We hadn't yet finished or even gotten through a month's worth of backlogged financial analysis for those months that I described. And then the reality set in once we realized where the revenues actually hit, once we filed month by month for the town, and looked at where the expenses were lining up towards the end of the year. We essentially ran out of time as the end of the year approached, and we had to, if you recall, come back and ask for a transfer of funds to cover shortfalls in an object code. So it was not the set of events that we wanted to occur at the end of the year, but it was sort of the sum of several factors that hit us at the same time. We also, earlier in the year, had additional appropriations and transfers we needed for things that were out of our control. Unfortunately, as you all will recall, the underground storage tank that required extra money for remediation to be taken care of around the start of the calendar year. There were items that unfortunately were out of our control from that standpoint, but there are also items that were in our control once we were able to get our hands around them, which fortunately or unfortunately was a lesson in how to go forward from that point on. We got through the end of the fiscal year, lessons learned, and are attempting to do and to learn from those lessons and carry those forward starting this fiscal year. And I'm happy to talk about some of those areas that we're trying to implement and areas to try to sort of rein in the deficit as a whole. But that's sort of the long and short of where we ended up and where we are now.
All right, but so...
One other thing, Mark, just as a memory refresher. Our plan was to finish Project Renew by the end of the previous fiscal year on June 30th and open with our full 202 beds, 42 of which were for rehab, on July 1st. And you may recall that we couldn't get the state to come down and give us a license, even though we notified them the previous December that we were going to be ready on July 1st. And so we lost a whole month of our full 42-bed census in short-term rehab, which represented roughly a $1 million shortfall. When we finally did open on July 29th, we had 9 patients of the 42 who would normally have occupied the short-term rehab unit, and we didn't reach full occupancy for 30 days after that until August 29th. So the net impact of that is we lost about a month and a half of revenue opportunity for that fiscal year. And what you're seeing in that much larger than expected bottom line loss is the shortfall of that $1 million that we weren't able to attract while the beds were out of use. So just kind of keep that in mind. We remind people about it a lot. It's kind of old history. Nobody wants to hear about it anymore, but it is part of the base that we're dealing with for 2015, 2016.
Okay. But so for this new fiscal year, I mean, yes, we're only 2 months into it.
Right. Well, for the new fiscal year, the good news is we're running ahead of our budget in short-term rehab, and we budgeted that out of the 42 beds that we planned on having, we budgeted that 37 would be filled on average, and we're slightly ahead of that. You know also that we've planned for an expansion of an additional 5 beds by using some of the temporary beds that were constructed during the project. And we're now in architectural development for those 5 beds, hoping that we'll have the additional 5 by the first of the year.
We start this fiscal year with some challenges and some challenges in the assumptions that went into the budget for this fiscal year, which obviously had to be in place long ago. But one of which was a total, as Alan alluded to, the total number of beds available is a very important number. And when you take away a single bed, for example, and you multiply it over the number of available bed days per month and carry that forward for 12 months, that has a very significant impact. And unfortunately, we've been having to operate about 197 beds when we're licensed for 202 beds. These are the beds that Alan alluded to that we were working to trans 5 short-term rehab beds that we have approval for that we're hoping to have up and running to get at least some of that revenue generated for this fiscal year. Other areas that we're budgeted into that we are beholden to now, but in actuality we had changes, were we budgeted a private pay increase. We've actually budgeted 2 private pay increases, one of which was subsequently voted down by our board and not put into play as we thought it would be. But it was budgeted for ahead of time. So we're automatically playing catch up on every private pay resident versus their private pay rate. And lastly, just one of the areas to keep in mind when you're looking at the numbers that you have in front of you, one of a large pay source for us is Medicaid residents. You may or may not be familiar with the fact that sometime within the first quarter, the end of the first quarter of the fiscal year, the state provides us with our new Medicaid reimbursement rate per resident day. That hasn't arrived yet, but it's retroactive to July. So we budgeted in a certain amount on various assumptions, and that's in actuality with the budget, but we're showing right now the old rate. So we hope to even have a retroactive increase in the revenues on the Medicaid side for the months of July and August when we actually know that final rate, and that'll be reflected in the month that we receive that rate letter. And that's roughly $10 per day per Medicaid day, which is, if that comes in towards the budgeted expected amount, would be about $30,000 per month, so $60,000 added to this August year-to-date amount for Medicaid. There's various assumptions we have to work with, and we are attempted to budget with ahead of time, as I'm learning going into the budgeting for the 2017 process right now. That clearly is difficult so far in advance, and clearly is difficult when you're beholden and dependent upon various factors. But that being said, we know the reality as we started the year and try to be as creative as possible to attempt to make up for those shortfalls. One of the areas that we know kind of got away from us toward the end of the year because of not having the financials available to us on a monthly basis until for a gap of time until I stepped in was general expenses. And that's one of the areas that we know we can control more so than even revenues. Revenues require, in order to have a very large change, require some wholesale changes. And that's something that is not quickly done. Expenses is something that you can attempt to really control and take active steps to rein in. And that's, from my seat, one of the first things I try to tackle to be able to do is to really take an active look wholesale at the expenses we have as a facility and manage them properly, manage them in a way that I see fit, that we see fit collectively to rein those in month to month, quarter to quarter, and to bring those forward by the end of the year and hopefully having a positive picture with total expenditures. So we have looked at a monthly snapshot picture. We're familiar with the fact that we accrue on a monthly basis, so I accrue payroll to get an absolute picture of where we are on a monthly basis from a wages perspective. And one of the areas that we've instituted is to attempt to keep all of our department heads abreast and aware of where they are. So monthly letters with their individual budget line items, including wages, and saying, here's where you are compared to where the budget shows you should be after 1 month, 2 months. If you're favorable, great. If not, we need to talk about how you're going to get back in line. Really trying to kind of rein that back in and get control of expenses, because that's a very large part of the revenue expense relationship, obviously.
Just, Alan, take us through why the board turned down a rate increase.
Well, we're in the top 5 percentile of rates statewide. And last year, we broke $500 a day for a private room. Our room rates are actually $507 for a private room, and $487 for a semi-private room, and then an additional $10 a month on that for the dementia unit. So $517 for a private room on the third floor and for 89 for a semi-private room. And we're among, of 230 nursing homes in the state, we're in the top 15 for our rate. And the board felt that since we were getting resistance, particularly to occupy our long-term beds, that it would be ill-advised to go any higher, because we're already seeing resistance even at the current rate.
So how about within Fairfield County or southwestern Connecticut?
Even in Fairfield County, we're among the top. Interestingly, there is one Fairfield County facility that's significantly higher than us. It's in Milford, and my suspicion is the reason that they go that high is they just simply don't have that big a private pay component. So, it's for show, if you will.
So the other side of the ledger then, what could you potentially do for expenses? I mean, can you negotiate with some of the unionized employees? Can you, more efficiency? I mean, I know you're
Well, we
looking at
have,
this, but
that's one of our, I think from the town's perspective, that's one of the big issues for us. We know that one of the reasons our expenses are high is because we are a municipal facility and our employees are paid not so much out of the range for their wages, but they're relatively rich in their benefits compared to the private sector. That includes the nonprofit homes that are independent and also the for-profit homes that are allegedly in the business to make money. I've quoted this number to you before, but in the general industry, the cost of labor-related expenses equates to about 65% of total costs. But at Witherall, we're at about 80% of total costs that are labor-based. That's including salaries and fringes. And until we can get our arms around the fact that our union contracts call for those benefits, we literally have to separate ourselves from the rest of the town and negotiate with the unions that are represented in our building differently than we represent with the rest of the unions in the town. So it's a tough challenge. There's the board charged me within the last month or so to make a presentation to them later this month at the board meeting in September to address what additional revenue opportunities we might have. And one of the research items that I came across was a study that had been done in New York State. It's less than 2 years old, which is interesting for us because in New York State at the time, not including the 5 municipal homes in New York City, there were 44 government-owned facilities in New York State, operated by 41 different counties. So there were a few counties that operated more than one facility in each county, each of those counties. Of those 44, 92% were unprofitable. And I contacted the study author and asked him, what's happened to those facilities. And in fact, in the last decade, 44 facilities has reduced down to 35. So I was curious what happened to the 9. And he said all 9 had actually been sold, each one of which was generating a $10 to $15 million a year loss. So my question to him is, who in the world would want to buy a facility that's losing $10 to $15 million a year? And he said, well, it's a combination of people. Sometimes the for-profits believe that they have economies of scale, central offices, and a handle on some of their expenses that an independent facility might not, and they think that they can turn a place around. But largely their losses were resultant from labor contracts that had been negotiated 10 years prior that didn't recognize what these costs were going to generate in the way of losses 10 years into the future. And one of the study findings is that the large majority of the losses being generated in these homes are resulting from expensive labor contracts, unsustainable labor contracts. And the conclusion was, if they don't get those labor contracts under control, the closure rate will be what he described as epidemic. So I think we have that problem as well.
So Alan, on that point of fringe benefits, could you just take us through how those are allocated month by month? I'm just looking at the data we got on both July and August, and having trouble seeing what the algorithm is for allocating to that month. I'm trying to find a relationship with wages, but I'm not seeing that. Just explain to us how you allocate those.
You're probably better off asking that question of Roland, because we don't calculate the costs. We take the costs that the town gives us and simply apply them to our cost report.
Right, but to your point, so I think the costs that you're referring to on this sheet are a product of our calculations internally. So in lieu of the ability to get regular actual fringe benefit information, which I'm willing to work with Roland and Peter on trying to get that as often as possible, but without that information, we do the best we can to estimate where we are. The other option is to carry fringe benefits like we do with the other items here, town insurance, sewer taxes, in-kind services, carry those at budget on a month-to-month basis, which doesn't show anything except for putting the total costs in there. But to answer your question, fringe benefits, as you see there, are an estimated calculation of current month. Another reason I try to capture the current month payroll, including the accrued pay for the month of August, for example, for non-part-time labor. And that's multiplied by the last actual figure, which we had was for the end of last fiscal year. So percentage of total non-part-time pay in fiscal 15 is used against what our current payroll, non-part-time payroll is for the current month. So it's the closest approximation we can get to understanding exactly where we are on a regular basis. It's also one of those areas where if that moves one way or the other, it throws things in a direction either positive or negative very easily. If the estimate and calculation is accurate, it helps us out for sure, and from a favorability perspective. If it's not accurate, then we're going to be, and the longer it carries forward, we're going to find out that we're in more of a trouble with that than we are than we want to show. Last year, we came out very favorably with fringe benefits, which helped us out in the end. Luckily, we were able to use that to transfer, if you recall, at the end of the year. Assuming that this budget was put into place before that amount was known to have been over budgeted for, the assumption is that we're in that similar area, and so using current payroll against last year's percentage of benefits. And it's one of those areas going forward when we talk about budgeting for next year, and the reason you wanted us to come in now versus next month because you're looking at the guidelines, hopefully we can get an idea if this is fairly accurate. If not, if there's flaws in the assumptions, one of the areas I'd like to talk with finance about to figure out how we can best predict without, in lieu of having monthly final actual information for fringe benefits, which we don't yet have.
So, I'm sorry, two questions. So, you guys over budgeted for fringe for 15, which just ended, by like 8 or 9%. And so then you had that available, which we transferred into the hundreds object code.
Correct.
So in 16, do we think we're 8 or 9% over budgeted again?
I'm not sure that the over budgeting occurred primarily in the pension estimate, and that should stay fairly flat year over year because the pension arc stayed flat from one year to the next. So.
Okay.
So I think you're saying that we're probably, again, over
Probably,
budgeted
yes, is
without
what you're saying.
any changes. Right, so that's why I'm attempting to use the most current recent actual data against comparable salaries, correct salaries.
And then just to the specific question of how you allocate month by month, is it a function of wages? Because when I look July, August, your wages went down, but your fringe went up.
It's a function of everything that's non-part-time. So if you look at the difference between July and August part-time, you have to essentially throw that out because we're not charging the fringe benefits in this calculation against that. So the full-time and overtime salaries applicable with full-time employees are what that's charged against. So the fact that overall wages, you don't really want to look at that as much as the breakdown you have here of full-time, part-time, overtime.
Okay. Roland, did you want to speak to how this allocation takes place?
We had a certain procedure set up before we went to ADP, and we're still trying to work out how we pull this information out of ADP so we can calculate these fringe benefits. The way we did it for last fiscal year is we took the actual payroll deductions and, well, the entire payroll for them. And so from that, we could see over the course of those 9 months since we went live with ADP, for example, how much was the pension contribution based upon pensionable earnings, how much was the defined contribution based upon those earnings, how much was the actual healthcare insurance based upon who was enrolled on a by individual per month basis. But like I said, that was sort of a manual effort to get that finished for the end of the year, and we need to figure out how to go forward and do that on a more automated basis.
Yes, so certainly my statement is, I hold no blame to Roland or his team at all, because I realize that difficulty that's since the transition of trying to figure out the new way to do that. So the only effort I can make is to make it as realistic as possible with the data we have, or just carry it at the budgeted amount divided by 366
Right.
days.
That's another way to do it, right?
So let's talk about contributions. One of the reasons your actual 15 is down so much is the original budget had $2 million of contributions from the Friends. And I guess you recorded 750,000. I guess 250,000 came in late. So it's in this current fiscal year, which is in the numbers, at 250,000 down there. But basically, you're $1 million short. The budget for 16 shows $1 million from contributions. I know Mr. Hornsby's not here, Mr. Bankston's here, I don't know if he can talk to that, but outlook for contributions, I mean, is that going to be a sore point?
I think it may be. I don't want to speak for them, but my sense of listening to them talk, I do attend the Friends board meetings, is that the likelihood of them raising $1 million for this year is not good. I don't know how much they will fall short of it. I know, Dave thinks that there's some opportunities out there. But one of the challenges that he and the Friends have is that much of the money that they raised successfully was raised on the back of a capital campaign that depended on the process of the renovation program, which is now over. Some of the people who were involved in the campaign itself believe that it has to be closed, that with the project ended, there's no urgency on anybody's agenda to contribute to a project that no longer is underway. So that's one of the challenges that they'll face. I think Dave feels more optimistic that there's money out there that can be captured than some of the other board members do. But
prior to Project Renew, had there been an annual support that raised a certain amount of money?
this was the first ever capital campaign, and the fact that they raised $4.5 million, there's two aspects to it. One is that they had projected that they would raise $7 million, so there was an aspect of disappointment that sort of was captured in the shortfall. The other side of the argument is that they've never raised a penny before that, and that there ought to be some aspect of gratitude or praise for the effort that they did make and the result that they did achieve. And then they also were very successful, as we all know, in generating that tax credit, which was another $4.5 million. So the Friends feel that they've done an exceptionally good job in raising $9 million, and they'd even like to see that recognized to some degree in an understanding by the town that the money that was borrowed to fund Project New should somehow be offset against the obligation that Witherell has to repay that full amount of debt. So rather than having to pay the town back for $24 million of borrowing, maybe the $9 million ought to be subtracted to that, and the calculation of principal and interest that results should be lowered. But that's a discussion that you have to have. It's not something that we can direct.
But it is also one of the reasons why it's good that we're here this month rather than next month. So it's one of the items is that offset in the debt principal charges for Witherell. When you're looking at the guidelines of the 2017 budget, that I think it's worth having a discussion about or considering internally. Is there a function or a methodology whereby we can have that offset? So that, like as Alan said, the debt and interest charged against the 24 minus the 9 million, whatever you want to call it, from Friends that went towards that building. And one of the other areas that we want to just to emphasize, going back to you asking about the contributions, the tax credit, there is, and Roland can correct my number, I think about 1.4 million allocated towards this fiscal year. So out of the four, there's, I think, 1.385 you'll see hit at the, I guess, in June of 2017. So that will be, and that goes under the contribution line item.
Yeah, I mean, that's in the budget for 16.
Right.
But while you're on contributions, I would like to, when you agreed to do and we approved Project Renew, there was a commitment by the board and the fundraising board to raise $7 million. And, the commitment was $1 million in the first year and then $2 million for the next 3 years. And what we found was, I think, there was that first year when there was $1 million, but each of the next year was short and somewhat substantial. Last year was supposed to be $2 million a year, and it was $750,000. And this year is supposed to be another $2 million a year. And so, while you talked earlier, Alan, about the loss due to the lower census in the rehab unit, that was about $360,000 versus a differential in terms of fundraising of about $1,250,000. So, it is a balance here. One of the other things that you mentioned as you were talking was, well, there are really a couple things here, was, and I just didn't get a chance to kind of circle in here. You talked about your labor as a percent of your total costs, and you compared what a higher percent Witherall is, and you had a group or something that you looked at for both the private sector and I guess 501c3 nursing homes, whatever. I would be very interested to see if you could subtract out their real estate costs, because Witherall has had no real estate costs, whether it's rental or, capital costs of ownership, a mortgage and interest and so forth, and see how do those numbers change once you subtract out your real estate costs. Because for nursing homes, real estate costs are a substantial cost for the business. I mean, that's why the whole REIT industry formed. So, it would be kind of more than an exercise to see, if that ratio changes, once you could, or maybe a simpler way would be to add what would be comparable real estate costs to Witherall and then make that comparison. But I think something like that would be interesting. You talked about the fringes, Mary Lee, and I think Roland talked about the pension, but what concerns me is the way we did that contribution. I wonder whether it's a high enough contribution now, because Witherall has probably had a higher percent of its employees retire, and the way we charge it is based on the active employees. And I just wonder if that balance is now being shifted to other departments or the rest of the town. So, I mean, I think that that's something for the future. And then finally, there was a point where there was a differential in terms of how the unions were negotiated. And that really, in the wages and the fringes. And I think Don Fritz was key to that negotiations with Alcava. And those were really the years that when Witherall sort of turned its bottom line. So I think the bottom, I would say that it's possible to make some kind of differential between the town and Witherall, whether you can do it to the extent that you're talking about versus the private sector, I'm not sure. But it has been done in the past, and it's certainly something that, if you think it would be helpful, then perhaps you need to look at a team to supplement your board or somehow, or just to consult with you to see if you can work someone on that. Because I agree with Mark. I mean, we're talking about these differential in the loss alone being about a full percentage increase to all the taxpayers in town. And I think we all work so hard on the budget that we're, and I know you are too, very sensitive to this issue.
Well, another issue that we all, not only the management staff here at our place in Witherall, but also the board, would hope that the town would come back and address again is the charge for allocations or in-kind services. And that's something that represents about $1 million a year to us. Whether or not it's a true revenue source to the town or not, it's something that increases our expenses. The argument for doing it is that it goes into the calculation of our per diems for Medicaid, and without it, we might get a lower rate. The argument against it is that it's a budget neutral point to the town in general. We get a charge, the town gets some revenue, and the two equal out. So is it doing us any good in the setting of the town's tax rate to be charging that against our expenses?
But we can't lose sight of the fact that overall, the town's largest department is the Board of Education. But, that we always talk about the Board of Education separately. But once we get to the town, or whether we look at the whole thing, either Witherell is the largest town department or the second largest when you include Board of Education. So whether that marginal difference is that or not, it's a big user of many of these services too.
All right, but so it's for 2015, the budget for allocations was 7.6 million. It came in at 6.9 million, so there's a savings there. And you guys are still way over budget. So don't blame allocations. I mean, there's a lot of other issues.
It's only one of the issues that, we have allocations, we have principal and interest. Between those two, there's $3 million of our expenses.
And all it is in all honesty, it's trying to look at items that we can talk about collectively ahead of, again, a good reason we're here, ahead of guidelines for 2017. Maybe no changes are made, but I think it's worth looking at these things collectively to see their collective impact on an aggregate level. Because barring that, it's going to be, like I said, wholesale changes which take a lot longer to implement, and then we'd be looking at budgets that are several years down the road. So trying to, like I said, maybe it won't be a large drop in the bucket, but if you put some of these areas together, then may be implementable for more near-term budgets. That's the reason we bring them up.
Okay.
Could I just say, the conversation about allocations is important to have, but for me, still the focus is your census. Every time I get the sheet, it's the census number I go right to see where you are versus budget. And then your net operating results before allocations, before contributions, just to see how you're controlling your expenses. To me, those are the two drivers that are really more important than the conversation about allocations.
That's fair, 100%.
All right, so in terms of next month, or, when should we try to get together again?
Well, I would like to come back next month because assuming we can get back in front of you for a conversation after we've gotten our financial results produced for September, we'll have July, August, and September. And that's the first quarter, I think, that you were interested in when you asked us for a quarterly report.
Yeah.
I will also have talked with the board a week from Monday about strategic issues that we might want to pursue to enhance our revenue. We'll have a better idea, I hope by then, of how quickly we'll be able to open those additional 5 beds for rehab. A piece of good news that we always point to is that even though we went from 38 to 42 beds, we're still turning people away because we don't have sufficient beds to handle all the referrals. We're thinking it's possible that we're turning so many people away that even after we get to 47 beds, we still may have capacity unserved, and maybe we ought to talk about converting some long-term beds to short-term and go from 47 to something higher than that. And that's an issue that the board will have to address as well, because going back to Mary Lee's comment, the area that seems to be hurting us from a revenue point of view more than any right now is our shortfall against our budget in long-term beds. We're running pretty much on any given day 10 beds vacant in long-term. And what we're finding is even as a bed opens up, different from in the past, it used to be we would just go to our waiting list, tell somebody the bed was open, and we could fill it. Now there's all sorts of family issues. Does mom really want to be in a nursing home? Is there an opportunity to go somewhere else that's nicer? What about all these assisted living facilities that are opening up that have private suites for less money than a nursing home, and so on and so on. Also, part of that formula is that it used to be that we could reach out into our waiting list and bring somebody in who had a substantial asset base, and they would become private pay for a year, 2 years, 3 years or more. Now we're finding that we go out into the waiting list and people are spending down their assets before they even talk to us. And so those people come in under a Medicaid reimbursement, and from day one, we lose money every single day. We're short. It costs us over $400 to serve them, and we only get $253 from the state. So those are dynamics that, that have turned around even just in the last couple or 3 years.
If we bump over for a month, I would like not to be having a generalized conversation a month from now. I'd be hoping that you could have put together a refined projection of a budget. Maybe at that point, you'll know what your Medicaid reimbursement rate from the state is. I know you're waiting day to day to hear it, but maybe that'll happen. But maybe you could run some calculations so we could be talking not in a general sense, but have not a guarantee, but a somewhat refined budget of what it's going to look like for the upcoming year. So at least we can write guidelines for the year following based upon that.
I'm happy to, but so you're looking for sort of a, based upon the first quarter, a projection for the remaining in totality fiscal 2016?
You've given us a budget for the upcoming year. I'd like you to take some of the additional information that's coming to you now. How did you do for your first quarter? What's your new reimbursement rate on Medicare?
Reproject that budget.
What's the best guess on what Friends can and can't do for us and this sort of thing? And from that, give us at least your October version of a refined budget, making some adjustments in the budget that we saw from you a couple of months ago, because that's information that people want to write guidelines on, trying to make a good guess of what 16, 17 is going to look like. And we'd like to at least be getting that refined information. There won't be any tax credits for 16, 17, not that I know of, but at least we could have some refined figures on other items.
I'm happy to, because frankly, part of what we're working on now, like I mentioned before, is trying to get our hands around where realistically we think the 2017 budget's going to go internally. I mean, obviously it comes down to you all, but that'll go hand in hand with the data I'm putting together, which is based upon historical actuals from 2015 after we fully opened up. So call it throwing out the anomaly of the first quarter of last year, looking at the preceding 9 months, and looking at that as more of a realistic picture and trying to carry that forward using these first 3 months of this quarter. So we're doing that right now, so I'll be happy to share that with you.
Well, it'd be very good for us to understand fiscal year 16, instead of, if you've got a projected $500,000 positive net income versus losses going to be $2 or $3 million, again, is something we need to do.
Are you at the point where you have the financial capability because of the computerized systems to be able to put together a, basically a little financial statement for each of your 6 units, allocating, fixed and variable overhead and expenses, including the staffing paid for a floor, and then allocate your total costs. Is that something that, it just you don't have the financial and computer capability yet, or is that something that now, it just seems to me that if you're in the private sector, you'd be working on this, done intensely, but.
So the short answer is it's a current project for us. So we're working on that as we speak, and the way, call it a rollout, the way I've been structuring, kind of transitioning to that, we call it a kind of a segment approach or product segment, looking at long-term, short-term, for example, long-term care versus short-term care, looking at the variable and fixed costs allocated to each one of those to better understand what changes affect what on the long-term side and short-term side. That has been, call it phase 1 rollout to the financials that presented you with for August and July. The reason they're different from June is because there is a breakout, and the August one wasn't complete for long-term, short-term, but July broke out that long-term, short-term. It's a very time-consuming process because there's a lot of data behind it. So the answer to your question is working on that right now, and it will be in stages so it's done correctly. So working with our board and our finance committee to say, what are you seeing that you like, what do you not like, and tweaking going forward. So eventually, the idea would be to have that full segment breakdown. So if you want to call it a by floor segment breakdown or by level of care segment breakdown, that's the ultimate goal. Unfortunately, I wish it was as quick as just being able to snap my fingers and make the calculations generate themselves, but it's really kind of taking an upheaval of the way things were previously calculated and then making sure it's done correctly going forward. So it takes time, but it's actually exactly where we're headed.
And then I have one more question. Is Witherall at a point where it would be helpful to talk to someone, that has been in and looked at Witherall before, whether, we had the firm from,
Health
the Upper
Dimensions.
Midwest, Health Dimensions, I think there was Bardwell. I mean, are we to a point where when you come back next month, you should be looking at, a suggestion of bringing in such a third party to look at Witherall and see if there are any other ideas or things that should be done and put some budget together for it if it makes sense? I mean, again, the differential here seems to be increasing rather than narrowing, and if there's something like this that would be constructive, it seems sometimes you spend money to, save money.
I visited a facility last week up in the Hartford area that has done exactly that. I have the names of all the consultants that they used, and they used a half a dozen. But the interesting thing about that facility is it is the go-to facility in that area. It's in Simsbury, which is an affluent location in the state. And they've been transitioning their model for the last 5 years. They started out with a 184-bed facility. They're currently at 89, and they're going to 60, and they've converted the beds that they've lost to assisted living. And they, interestingly, in the process of doing that, they've lowered their staffing numbers from over 600 to just over 400, and they've converted from a loss to a profit. But they have a substantial investment in assisted living, which, from my perspective, is a real estate venture. It's not a healthcare venture. And you can charge for a relatively small apartment way above what that apartment would draw if you were renting it to the general public, just because you're serving a senior citizen. So you charge a premium rate for a little bit higher level of service, and then you charge a la carte rates for level of care and medication management and one-on-one services that may be needed. And all of a sudden, you're out of the nursing home business and into the real estate business. Can we do that? My suspicion is probably not, but maybe on a small scale.
I wasn't necessarily thinking about going that far, but I was just thinking about a third party, working with you and your board.
I have some names of people who are well respected in the industry, so, or we could go back. From my own personal viewpoint, I think Health Dimensions Group, to be honest, I think they sold us short. You may recall that Health Dimensions Group thought it was a stretch even to open 40 beds. And from my viewpoint, at least, since those beds are the beds, really the only beds that we have that make money, we have a small portion of our business that's private pay. We have a larger portion of our business that's Medicare generated. And those are the two places that we make some money. And then we have this huge loss leader in Medicaid, and we can't possibly make up enough in the smaller portions to offset the loss in Medicaid. But there are other businesses that could be profitable, and one of them is short-term care.
And then I think it was the Peter Bardwell firm that also, was used. So, there may be some conversation.
Yeah, okay, let's move on. I think, gentlemen, thank you for coming, and let's be in touch. I mean, why don't you communicate through Roland, if you're ready to give those numbers and quarterly results in our October 13th meeting.
Well,
Sure. Yeah, well,
I mean, if you don't mind, I would like to be a little more assertive than that. I would like to get those numbers. I don't want to go over to a November meeting or whatever.
Assuming he has the numbers and they're ready.
Well, I'd like to have at the October meeting,
Here
the best
is-
numbers you can put
so
together.
the October meeting is on October 13th.
Yeah.
Yes.
The only roadblock is we can't close our revenue figures until October, depending on what day, October 15th. So I can give you, what we can do is probably do the same thing again. I'll give you preliminary October with the full confidence that it's accurate, and then carry forward, and work to carry forward the rest of the year based upon that. It'll be maybe a day turnaround, but I'll be open communication with you to
Well,
do that.
I was going to exacerbate that by then asking, could we see it a couple of days ahead of time? Because it's harder for us to digest the figures
I know, I understand.
than it is for you.
It's the nature of the time of the month.
And you have to do what they call an MDS close. The MDS is the minimum data set that you submit to the state.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen until the 10th. So then there's a reconciliation between the MDS data and the census data. That takes a couple of days. Almost impossible for us to close any sooner than that.
Okay.
But that being said, I mean, being able to provide the first 3 months, I think would be right on the line to be able to do it, just like this was. At least at the very least, having preliminary October to show those 3-month trend. The thing I have to figure out would be how to then, without the time to carry that forward, like what you're really interested in is how does that look as an adjusted budget for the rest of the year.
Right.
What maybe I'll figure out a way to build that ahead of time and be able to just plug in what October shows into
So
that
it's
projection.
this with an extra column projected for the full fiscal year, right? Is that what we're talking about?
That's
Yes.
I mean, it'll be
probably,
the third month plus year to date.
So
which is 3
we'll have a
months.
quarter number, we'll have a projected fiscal year number?
that's the goal, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and that last column is the one that's the most interesting to me.
Well,
Right, of course, that's the one you want to
Yeah.
see.
I don't think we need that many days in advance, I think.
Yeah, we can just
We'll-
get it
we
and look
can
at it.
get it
So the
when
best
we-
you can do.
Yeah.
And to Jeff's very good earlier comment about, let's just look at the numbers. Let's not get into the longer term. We're not going to solve Nathaniel Witherall.
Philosophical judgments, yeah.
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 So anyway.
In the interim, I'm at your disposal, so if things come up in the interim, feel free to reach out to me, I'm accessible, and
Okay.
I'm happy to shoot information back and forth.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Alan.
All right, why don't we go back through these requests?
I'm going to move that we make routine the first 4 items. The last 2, I don't know, I know Leslie was expressing concern about whether or not these are items that should have been done, should have been carried over to the regular budgeting process. Maybe that's a reason not to call them routine, but I would call the first 4 items PD1, HD1, PR1, and PR2. I'd move that we call those routine.
Yeah, but.
Yeah, but not additional
They're
appropriations.
additional appropriations, so
Those are
those
non-routine.
are probably non-routine.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think the
I
first
agree
2
with that.
are routine.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the
They're grants,
question.
and it doesn't affect the budget, but those are 2 things we're sending to the RTM as additional appropriation.
I agree.
I agree.
They should be
They
non-routine.
need to be non-routine.
Okay, all right. All right, then I'll go along with that. So I'll amend my motion and call the first 2 routine and the next 2 non-routine. The 5th one, PW1, I would call non-routine, and I would amend the release to be for $1,450,000.
Okay, so before we get to that then, with the fire and Nathaniel Witherall, we've had it before where we just didn't we made no action on these. I mean, if, let's just say for the fire, we don't really need to release the conditions for overtime. We can postpone that to a later quarterly report.
I was going to move as to those that we postpone it to the October 13th meeting, each of them. I was going to make the same motion on each of them, postpone the item to the October 13th
Okay,
Budget
so
Committee meeting.
we're all under repeat by postponing, we just don't even bring it up with the full BUT, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Which is the other one you're postponing?
FD1 and NW2.
Nathaniel Witherall on the fire.
All right, so let's go these one by one. So I'll entertain a motion for PD1.
I'd move that it be routine.
Well, why don't you make a motion?
I move that we approve it, 27,200 as a routine item. Sorry.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, 4-0.
I'd move that HD2, $45,377 for the Health Department, the approval of use of the grant, that it be approved and that it be a routine item.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
I'd move that PR1 Parks and Recreation, $48,000 in additional appropriation, that it be approved, but it be approved as a non-routine item.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
I'd move that PR2, Parks and Recreation, additional appropriation for a new steel workboat, $15,000, that be approved, but be approved as a non-routine item.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
On PW1, Department of Parks and Recreation, a requested release of $1,006,000. I would move that we approve the release of $1,450,000 as a non-routine item.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. I would move that FD1, Fire Department, $455,547, release of conditions, that item be postponed to the budget meeting of October 13th.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And lastly, NW2, Nathaniel Witherell, release of conditions on $600,000. I move that item be postponed to the Budget Committee meeting on October 13th.
I'll second that, but I would like to ask a question.
Okay.
Does Mike want any of these to be discussed at the full BET meeting? Because by removing them, doing this, they won't be discussed. I don't know
Well-
whether he'd like to have any input?
I can always make a
can talk about
comment. I'll make a comment about it. It's up to our chairman what he'd like to do, but,
You can still give it as part of the budget committee report.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine with
I
me.
mean, I certainly
Again,
want to mention it.
I just wanted to bring it up.
Okay.
So I second it, so I guess.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. Old business? None. New business, report of current economic conditions?
Oh, I don't know whether it's old business, but, MISA opened for students today. So that's it got its TCO, and they were in their new classrooms. So that's very exciting, and the auditorium seating area still has another sort of week's work to be done, but it will be available for the October 3rd exciting Greenwich Symphony concert, 375th. So
Did you say they have the TCO, or they're about to?
I know, they got the TCO on 4 of the 5 areas for the auditorium. And so
Okay.
all the classroom areas, all classes were moved into the new space.
Great.
So now we're readying the existing space for demolition, et cetera. So see Leslie Moriarty here, she certainly was critical, as well as a small group of the building committee members to get this all accomplished.
That's great, great news.
I think Kathy wants to march around and sing God's Bless America,
I
right?
just wanted you to see.
Oh, there you are, okay.
This is a replica of the smaller flags of the 375th, and the large one has also been made for the parade.
That's great.
Great.
Yep.
No, great. We'll wave them as we march out.
Because, of course, they wanted for the concert that Leslie was talking about. too,
Right.
Because there's going to be some special music that day.
Okay, great. Roland, want to talk about revenues, economic conditions?
The revenues are pretty good. They're running at last year's level. I guess the one thing to note on this is if they continue to run at last year's levels, because we increased the budget by $500,000 between the two of them, it's $5,000 is not going to increase fund balance, because it's just, our budget's higher now.
Okay. Expenses you don't have yet.
No.
Will you have that for the full B too? Maybe?
Maybe.
No? We'll see. Okay. Budget guidelines. I sent an email out to everyone on the BET. Again, it would have been nice to have the first draft, but as you saw in my comments, and we heard from the gentleman from Nathaniel Witherell, that's a big number that we've got to kind of work into it. So one of the things that I had suggested is that I did want to wait till after our debt policy meeting, agenda item on the full BET, which is on the 24th, see how that goes. I plan to then issue a draft by the 28th. I'm open to the idea if we want to have a special meeting to talk specifically about the budget guidelines on the 5th, which would be a week before our meeting on the 13th. So I throw that out as an idea, and as you heard from Alan Manelli, assuming he's got the appropriate information, we can also add that to the agenda for that special meeting to hear more about the options for our Byram Pool construction project.
Would you that be at 5 o'clock?
So we've actually already reserved room for 6:30 on Monday, October 5th. So my question, you can get back to me if you need to, is if that's good. The same time on October 6th, there's no room available, although maybe something might open up. But do you guys all roughly know whether that's possible on Monday, October 5th?
Say in a minute. Wait
Yeah,
for my
well, look,
thing to
just
boot up.
while you're looking, so our vote on the guidelines as a budget committee would be October 13th.
Correct.
And that's also when we're getting this quarterly information from Nathaniel Little.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping to have a more definitive results tonight, but they actually let us know at like 4 o'clock this afternoon, or excuse me, 2 o'clock this afternoon, that they weren't even going to come because they had some dispute on the numbers.
But
And I asked them
Mark,
if they
on
come.
the Nathaniel, just for you to roll with, I think we have a negative fund balance for Nathaniel for the losses. I think from a gas point of view, that number's 3.5 rolling.
At the end of the year it was, yes.
Yeah, so that's definitely got to be cleaned up, because they won't let us continue that. So we know at least that now is a starting point for what's got to roll into the next
Yeah.
budget. Then you got to figure we're already anticipating 2.5 on top of that, right? That's what we had sort of laid out.
With 2.4 is what we were kind of would assume to go in the next budget.
So in guidelines, we have to make it clear that we're funding what we had anticipated, and then we have to clean up that.
Yeah.
Am I right, Peter? We can't let that continue.
Well, we
Yeah.
have options there.
Yeah. There's a couple options. Is when do you want to clean it up?
Okay.
You can go back into 14, 15 and reduce the revenues in the fund, in the general fund to bring their fund balance back down to zero, or you could fund it for the auditors, which would require involvement by the RTM in the current year.
It's an appropriation.
Correct. Both impact the general fund balance by at least 3.5 million.
I'm sorry, or address it in the fiscal year 17?
It's an option, but how would you address it? Through,
Or just gonna build into the
it's going to
budget?
exacerbate by whatever he tells you, October 13th, let's say that hypothetically it's 2.5, he's projecting for 15, 16, you've got 2.4 plus 3.5 plus 2.5, then he's got to try to figure out 16, 17 could potentially be the worst year because the tax credits disappear.
Yeah.
You don't have the $1,385,000.
No
Your
more
donations
fundraising.
completely disappear. So you might be looking at anywhere up to $8, $9, $10 million, worst case, that goes into the subsidy to the Nathaniel Witherall.
The budget committee has to have the plan ready for the guidelines.
I don't
Parallels
rec-
what we're doing.
I don't recommend that. What I would do is at a minimum, take care of the 3.5 immediately, which you can take care of by adjusting the general fund in Nathaniel Witherall in the 14-15 year.
So Pete, can you just help us walk through, from setting a precedent for future years and also putting in place a process? Is that what you recommend, or would you recommend the appropriation going to the article? What is the best in terms of establishing a process?
I think the first step is a realistic budget. I think they said that the fringe benefits are a little bit high, and but that doesn't affect your actual. Your actual is what's creating the deficit. We might want to revisit the fringe benefit allocation and roll it back to an acceptable number to bring them maybe to break even.
Right?
But still, that's got to come back into the regular budget. I mean, we still got to pay,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, that will, remember, it sets precedents and whatever. This has all been arranged with Nathaniel Witherall's, Medicaid, Medicare accountant. So, and again, Alan has told us that it's worth a certain amount of money, and maybe a lot of money, in terms of our increases in Medicaid and our rate being higher than most, if not all, facilities in certainly the state of Connecticut. So we don't, from my standpoint, we want to be realistic, whatever that is. I mean, I always feel facts are realistic, but we don't want to do anything that's going to harm their future revenue stream also. because, again, they look at the total cost and they
I can
look
do
at
it
these
anytime.
Well, there's-
allocations, but they should be accurate.
There's
No question.
there's more than one. It's not only revenues, expenditures. What I heard tonight was it seems that his biggest concern was the labor. And if you saw the article in the Stanford Advocate a couple Sundays ago about the Smith House, where they were talking about privatizing the operation up there, and per the article, again, it's an article, I didn't see their financials, they were predicting a $5.7 million deficit. But their biggest concern was addressing the labor. I think there's probably 3, 4, 5 different areas. It's just not one solution that you have to, they need help from the BET to solve their problem.
Pete, could you just review, Smith House is now back in the general fund in Stamford, is that
I
correct?
believe they put it back in a couple of years ago.
Because of continuing deficits?
Per the McGladrey, who was the auditors a few years ago there, not there currently, they had run up a loan. They treated it as a loan to the Smith House. They cut up to maybe $8 or $9 million, and it was deemed uncollectible. So that
They wrote it off?
Yes. And what we currently have is, what's the receivable, over $5 million?
It's over 5, but
They don't have the ability to pay the general fund back.
Right.
Which is creating their negative fund balance. So, per the conversation with McGladrey, their first answer was, why don't you amortize it down slowly and have them pay it back? And I said, it doesn't appear that they have the ability to draw it down, and it might get worse for this current year and next year. And their options were fund it through an appropriation or to write it off. And again, the write-off would be to the receivable to the general fund, which would be a direct hit to the general fund balance.
And Pete, you kind of alluded to the fact, is one option not having to pay all of that 3.5 down now? I mean, as long as we're making an effort to pay that down fairly reasonably?
What do the auditors require?
You could slowly draw it down, but you're not solving the problem.
No, I know. I'm trying to put it to the next BAT.
What I can do is
Which is where I'd like you to put it.
what I can do is that the auditors that I had this conversation with is going to be here on the 21st. I could have her formally put together what the recommendation is going to be that's going to come out of the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for the year ending 15, what options we have to solve that discrepancy. I mean, with the large fund balance that we have in the general fund, the easiest solution is just write it off, or, forgive the receivable. As far as transparency, you do know what their actuals are. You still get this report every month from them on what the actuals are as far as revenues, the census data, the expenditures, and the fringe benefits. So you still have that transparency, but we can't let that number grow, because now it's going to have on the next BET a very hard problem of what do we fund Nathaniel Witherall if we don't do anything now, which becomes a larger number, and it becomes harder and harder for the next BET and the first selectman, who's got to transmit a budget by the end of January. I would write off the 3.5, the receivable to the general fund. All you're doing is reducing the revenues to the general fund. I mean, unless you think of, yeah.
I don't think the auditors, I think we put in next year's budget, I think they'd be just as happy with that, because there's a plan to get rid of it. We're not going
Yeah, but
to argue with them about it's good.
But Pete is recommending that we just pay it off now. Out of
That piece, the 3.5, you still have to address what he's going to come up with.
The 2.4, whatever it is.
The 2.4 plus what he's going to come up for 15, 16, and what the projection is going to be for 16, 17.
Well, I think I'm hoping all of that is just the 2.4. I'm hoping we're going to find out that they're running at a net negative of 2.4. You don't think that's the case?
No.
Well,
I think
because-
I think the negative is above the 2.4.
How much above?
Because they don't have the historic
I
tax
don't know.
credits of 1.385.
I mean, his negative number after 2 months was 923 actuals.
Yeah, if you project it,
We-
he's worse off.
We did, I did extrapolated out, I don't have it in front of me, and it came out to 6-something, and then I subtracted out the $1,385,000 for the historic credits, the 2.4, and I gave them the whole $1 million for the donations.
And
It's still about $2 million deficit.
So Pete, how many years, let's just say we push it off to the next group, how many years can you spread that receivable? Is there, I guess I would be interested, following up on Mark's point, I would be interested in, if you don't have the answer, having talked to McGladrey to find out what's
Okay.
acceptable.
I could ask him that, but you're proposing Roland's
Well,
proposal to slowly, the subsidy, increase the subsidy and
Well, Roland or Mark brought it up. I think I would like to explore that. I would like, just as you suggested, to have McGladrey put together a sheet with our various and sundry alternatives.
Yeah.
And I certainly would like on that sheet exactly what Mark has suggested and understand how many years.
Well, I think there's a bigger question. I think you need to look at Roland's mill rate projection. You got to see how much you're going to fund healthcare. You've also got the school lunch program deficit is growing, and you're going to have to see that little number that he always gives you in the lower right-hand corner.
I know, I mean-
How many millions does it take to get to the 3.5, the 3.25, the 3%,
Yeah,
et cetera?
yeah, no, we'll
So
look at that.
there's the bigger question is how do you balance next year's budget, 16, 17?
But either way, we're using fund balance, either paid off now using current fund
It's-
balance, or you assume you're going to use that much more fund balance in
To
the next
buy
fiscal
down
year.
the mill rate.
Yeah.
And I would also like to point out, while it's a zero-sum game in terms of the revaluation, as we've been saying over quite a few months over the last year or so, you can just read whatever it is, Greenwich Free Press or one of these, things out there to see that there are parts of town that are seeing growth in value and parts of town that aren't. So, in addition to these kind of mill rate increases that we're talking, we don't have any preview yet on the reval, but it's possible that some people are taxes are going to go up more than the mill rate.
But that's just going to be a shift between certain
Areas.
segments of the population
It's a
or the
shift.
households
It's a shift.
in
but some
commercial
people-
versus realty.
It's a shift, but some people may end up being more of a hardship in an economy where wages have basically been flat and inflation is flat.
Pete, what's the timing? Sorry. Is there a time pressure on making this decision, at least with respect to taking general fund money from 14, 15?
I think the only pressure is what number we're going to put in the mill rate calculation for the subsidy for next year.
It goes hand in hand with the budget guidelines.
Right.
So,
Okay.
there's a part of Mary Lee's sentence, she's in fiscal year 14-15.
I'm sorry?
Mary Lee's question was, is there a time pressure on being able to make an adjustment in the figures for this, for 14-15, the year past?
It's the same answer. It's what are you going to do? If you're going to write it, if you're going to take the, write off the receivable and reduce the revenues in the general fund, it reduces by 3.5 million what you're going to put in the budget subsidy for 16, 17.
Is there a difference between fiscal year 15 and fiscal year 16 as to
Yes.
where we buy it down?
Yeah, because I was assuming we paid this down now. Oh, to hell with it, let's take fund balance and pay it down. I assumed that was going to be an appropriation in the 15-16 year, the year that we're in right now, not the year past.
No. Yeah, it would be.
Can it be an
It would
adjustment
be
to
a
the past
rollback.
year?
No, it'd be a rollback. I'm not proposing appropriation, because you'd have to fund it in the current year.
Yeah.
And it would leave the 3.5 on your books for 14, 15. What we could do is write it off in 14, 15, meaning that you reduce the revenues in the general fund.
By
that-
3.5.
Yes, that you get, because right now it's a receivable.
All right.
Okay?
So now answer Mary Lee's question. Is there a time limit that we have to pay attention to if we wish to do
No.
that, applicable to the 14-15 fiscal year?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, to be discussed
Okay.
over the next week or two.
And again, Roland and I will sit down with the auditors and,
Yeah, Jim?
yeah.
I guess I would just, on behalf of the 4 new members of the BET who are likely to get elected, whatever solution you pick is fine, but I think we would like to be left with as much flexibility come January, February as we can have. So as you're putting your guidelines together or allocating fund balance, which is your job to do, to the extent we can maintain our flexibility for a few more months, we will know a few more months of actual numbers. The better off the new BET will be. So
Okay, no, that's a good point.
it's a plea for flexibility.
Yeah.
So, Peter, to pick up on Jim's suggestion, can we still be looking at the issue of whether or not to take it as a charge in 14-15 in January and February of next year?
No.
Well, no, we're voting on the
No,
guidelines.
no, no, and as far as, we have to decide with the auditors almost like immediately, meaning September.
Yes.
We have the flexibility with the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, to go all the way up to the audit date. The audit date's in December,
Right.
not January, though.
Okay.
Unless you're gonna solve the problem by an appropriation with the BET and the RTM in the current year.
Which is not what you're suggesting.
But you'll still have that negative fund balance in your CAFR if you don't write it off.
For the old year.
Correct.
But that isn't necessary. I mean, it's increasing and it's a good number, but relative to our overall budget, it's a small number. I mean, it will look not so good for Witherall, but on the other hand, it isn't a crisis. We have the money.
Yes.
So it's, I mean, I
Okay,
think
well,
it's still something we can look at.
Let's noodle over this a little bit. Yeah, So,
So I'm free October 5th. Did we
you guys
figure that
okay,
out?
October 5th?
And I'm free on October 5th.
Okay.
Okay.
You too, Kathy, are you? Okay, you are. Okay.
Did she say yes or no?
She's not sure.
So I'd move the approval of the minutes. So moving, is that all right?
Second.
Yes. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye. Is there?
It's getting late.
Yeah.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
And
So-
just everybody, just